Welcome to LionHeart Talks, a series of podcasts from LionHeart.
Hello and welcome to the LionHeart Talks podcast. This episode is the second of two that we're recording to mark Grief Awareness Week. But before we go any further, let me introduce myself. I'm Jo Grant, I'm the Training and Wellbeing Projects Manager at LionHeart, and again I'm joined by LionHeart Ambassador Claire Martin and LionHeart Communications Manager Hayley Draper. Hello both, and thank you for joining me again.
Hi Jo.
Hi.
So, in our previous episode, you both spoke quite openly about your experiences of bereavement and grief, and we recognised it's a topic that many people still find quite difficult to talk about. In this episode, we wanted to talk more about how grief can impact you at work and discuss bereavement policies and how employers can support employees when they've been going through a bereavement and are going through the grieving process. So let's start by setting the scene. Bereavement is a common experience. Nearly a quarter of working age adults knew someone who had died in the last year, with one study finding that 94% of employees said they had trouble concentrating at work after a loss. 78% of grieving employees didn't feel supported at work, and 4 in 5 grieving employees considered quitting their job. So those stats paint a bit of a picture for us, but what were your experiences like at work? Do you want to go first there with that question for me, Claire?
Of course. Because of my specific set of circumstances, my employer was very aware of Ben's illness in the lead up to his death. And so it wasn't a sort of an out of the blue event. But, and this I think is perhaps fair to say as a reflection across workplaces across the UK, is that you are largely at the whim of the line manager that you have or the management structure in the organisation that you work for. I, though, was extremely lucky. I had a fantastically supportive set of colleagues, wider colleagues, but specifically management above me, who supported me completely throughout Ben's illness and then after. I was sort of basically signed off still on full pay for a sort of indefinite period. And initially that was a sort of a carte blanche I was given, which was unbelievable at a time when everything was moving, everything was changing, the rug was being pulled from under my feet. Knowing that I didn't have to worry about work, they said just don't come in, we've got it. But knowing that also I was still getting a salary in at a time when I was worrying about the logistics and the practicalities of life as well, just took such a huge weight off my shoulders and allowed me to focus more on trying to get in well when we were in that phase of hoping and working. Also looking after my daughter Harriet, who was nursery age at the time. So my experience in the workplace was second to none. But I do completely recognise that is not everybody's experience at all.
I can imagine that was so important to have somebody that was, or be in a workplace where they were able to offer you that and just, like you say, take the pressure off of not having that to think about whilst you've got so much else going on at the time.
100%. I recognise that I was extremely fortunate with that. And I completely understand that not every workplace is going to be able to offer perhaps that indefinite support for their own set of circumstances. But knowing that I was able to have an open discussion, knowing that my management got it.
Yeah.
That they put a human spin on what was going on whilst they were my manager, and they didn't overstep the mark in that sense. They let me understand, and I did understand that I had their permission to go and do what I needed to do at that point, which was be with my family.
So important.
Yeah. So important.
And for you, Hayley, what was that experience?
I was very fortunate to work at LionHeart, actually. LionHeart has the dubious privilege of having supported me through the loss of both of my parents, albeit some years apart. And I can't imagine what it would have been like to have worked somewhere less flexible or understanding, I guess. I know that, as Claire says, it's not always going to be possible, depending on what you do or who you work for, to have that kind of flexibility. But for me, it did go a long way to helping, both immediately before I lost my mum, having the flexibility to be able to be there when I needed to be there, and your brain is often all over the place and your emotions are all over the place. I can remember my manager at the time telling me, "Well, you just take it day by day, and you can take it hour by hour if you need to." And it like you said, Claire, it is like a weight off your mind, really, because there's so much else that you have to think about and worry about. Really, it's hard to kind of juggle everything, and it is almost like giving somebody that permission to step away. This is, it's okay to be feeling this. I think after you've lost somebody, it can be very individual. I mean, some people will need time off. Some people might find that having something else to focus on or distract them is a good thing, and a healthy thing. It's almost as individual as everybody is, really.
Sounds like for both of you, you were in really supportive workplaces at the time, and that's great to hear. But we do know that bereavement leave for some people can range from as few as 2 or 3 days, maybe up to a couple of weeks, depending potentially also with the relationship that you've got with the person that has died. Were there bereavement policies, or are there bereavement policies in place at the workplaces you're at now? And are they something that you were aware of before you needed them, or something that sort of you only became aware of at the point you needed?
So for me, I'm with a different employer now than I was back then. I wasn't aware of the bereavement policy in place with my employer at that time. So no, Joe, I didn't know anything about it. It wasn't a policy that I felt would have been relevant to me at all in my age and stage of life. But I was fortunate that when things did change, I was able just to have a conversation with the management, and to be honest, I'm not even sure what the policy was or what.
Yeah.
I think they stepped well above what the policy was likely to have been anyway.
Yeah.
The employer that I'm with now does have a policy. I am aware of it, but I think there is a lot of manager discretion still operated, and from what I understand from colleagues around the company that I work with, managers do and are able to have the discretion to sort of depart from that policy and do what is right in a certain set of circumstances. So
Which is actually really important, isn't it? Because things will be different for each individual, and to have a fixed policy in place is going to suit very few people within an organisation.
I think that's a really good point. If I can draw a slightly strange analogy, but when I've returned to work after having children, there is a sort of a pathway set out for a maternity returner to work, possibly some keep in touch days, and perhaps a phased return. But there is that element of flexibility with what suits the mum and the child and the organisation, and there is a sort of an acceptance that is a vague framework that
Yeah.
can be worked on, but depending on somebody's situation. And I think there would be merit in adopting a similar idea, really, with approach to grief and bereavement, and having a sort of an idea about what it might look like, but having that flexibility that, as Hayley said, if somebody actually wants to come back for a focus, for a bit of a distraction, then that they can do that. If somebody needs a bit more time, or perhaps it's an element of changing their working structure in the short term, or to be more of a flexible arrangement, or drop some days in the short term to allow them time to deal with the logistics. I think those things would be really great to see used by workplaces across the UK, I think.
I think we've talked a little bit about the the immediate sort of aftermath of losing somebody, but I think one thing that's really important for managers, employers to bear in mind is that it doesn't just get wrapped up within a few days or a few weeks even. I find it quite staggering that, like a quarter of people who are working might be dealing with grief at any one time. It's like that's a significant proportion of any workforce. But I think people's needs might change as time goes on. For me, it was like we talked a bit about being kind of kind to yourself, and that's really important. But it's really hard to do, I think, in a work setting where you may be very focused on often like pressure that you put on yourself rather than anybody else. It's just you have to remember that we're all people and we're not kind of robots that feel feelings, sort of 9 to 5, or you can switch them off when it's 9 to 5 or whatever. People will inevitably, I think, have times where they're not as focused as they might be. Usually, if they're administering somebody's estate, as I've experienced, it takes way longer and way more brain power than you can possibly imagine unless until you've actually done it. And that can be hard to deal with. Like somebody might feel overwhelmed with all the different demands that are on them, from work and, juggling legal paperwork or bank paperwork and ticking off your list of, calls that you have to make. Again, it all comes down, I think, to flexibility, and which is great if employers are able to offer that, recognizing that it might not necessarily fit neatly into your 3 days or your 5 days or whatever, but there may be need for somebody to have time off to attend to, as I say, solicitors' appointments, bank appointments.
And it might not just be short term. There may be
It might drag on for months and months. Yes,
there might be but that needs to be potentially needs to be recognised in policies, doesn't it? Because I think quite often they say you've got this period of time that's assumed that will be used almost immediately, but there's so many other things that are going to continue to happen over the coming months, where having the ability to take that time or take time then as you need it is also really important.
It's really important, and I think it comes down to awareness from the employer, from managers, from us all, colleagues, of grief. I think we were mentioning in the first podcast about how, as parents or as human, it's of human nature to want to try and fix things, and grief is perhaps one of those things that you can't fix. And so some people naturally, the fear of not being able to fix something and not wanting to put their foot in their mouth and say the wrong thing, they perhaps hesitate and then don't say anything at all. But actually, if there is perhaps something that managers and businesses can think about, it's just to face into that. It is to ask the question. It is to walk alongside that person, because you can't solve it. It is just part of that employee's life. And like you say, it's in that immediate moment that whilst the storm is happening, but afterwards as well, there's the longer grief, the longer administrative issues. And actually, from a workplace perspective, it's for managers to be able to understand that it's not just boxed off and done, and sort of feel able to ask the question and just do those check-ins with their team in the aftermath after a death, to make sure that that individual has sort of what they need at that time, because it changes, as we've been saying.
An important takeaway for someone as a manager would be that continuing to ask questions and continuing to not just think, I've done that, I've asked within the first few weeks, the first month, and that therefore it's done, it's dealt with. It's recognising that you should continue to open that conversation and have that discussion for potentially months afterwards. I mean, I think it's quite staggering, the statistic that 78% of grieving employees didn't feel supported at work. I think as people, colleagues do want to support somebody that's going through a period of grief, but like you say, Claire, potentially afraid of putting their foot in it, saying the wrong thing, scared of making the situation worse. Can you remember anything helpful in terms of what your colleagues or your managers did to help you when you were handling your loss or going through your loss?
I think there's a couple of standout sort of feelings, if you like. The first was that they were just extremely human about it. There was no, in those moments, they were human talking to human. They weren't employer talking to colleague. Everything about the interactions that I had were very much down to dealing with me as a person, not me as employee number 1, 2, 3, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So that was really, really important. I felt they were concerned about Claire, not Claire the employee.
Yeah.
So that really was important. That really made me feel heard and seen and valued as a person that they wanted to look after. But just tapping into the point that you were making there about workplaces continuing that support for what might be weeks or months, what also was really important to me was them recognizing firsts, and
Okay. Yep.
and that could be like up to a year after,
Yeah.
or longer after a death. That first Christmas, the first, Hayley mentioned Mothering Sunday, your first birthday without that person around for you. And life can move on a lot in those months, perhaps before those firsts happen for you. But for you, when you're experiencing that first occasion or milestone without that person, my workplace, they didn't recognize it all, but certainly there was an awareness of, leading up to the first Christmas, that was going to be tough. And I think that was really, it meant a lot to me.
Yeah. Have you got anything to add to that, Hayley?
I think exactly that, isn't it? I mean, I've been very fortunate to work with people who are very human and very understanding. But to me, you're not always sure what you want or need, are you? But I think, and I understand that people are afraid sometimes of making things worse, or sometimes when I saw people for the first time, maybe since I'd lost my mum, that there was a tendency to like somebody would want to give you a hug, and there were some days where I was like, oh no, don't touch me, don't touch me because I'll cry. But just acknowledging, really, it is that there's, to me, there would be nothing worse than somebody not mentioning it. I think, and it can be as simple as somebody saying I'm really sorry. It doesn't have to be a really involved kind of conversation. But I'm sorry for your loss. I hope you're okay. Just something really simple. I recognise that there are some phrases that may be of comfort to some people and not others. So just a simple acknowledgement, I think, is really good, because not for myself, but I know people who have gone back to work after suffering a loss, and have had colleagues who just haven't acknowledged it in any way. And it's probably not down to being, unkind or cruel. It is probably down to fear of saying the wrong thing or making things worse. But actually, in that moment, it's really hurtful. I think there's something around grief that some days you're like, how can the world possibly still be turning when I feel like this? And I just think that there is real power in people. Just a simple acknowledgement, simple human kind of touch, really. It makes such a difference to people. And I think the other thing that really stayed with me is something that I probably read on LinkedIn or whatever. And it's you might not always remember the words that somebody used, like that a manager used at that time, but you will always remember how that person made you feel. And that can be both the positive and the negative. I've had very, very supportive managers. I've suffered quite a few significant losses, and each time I have been very fortunate to have managers that have been really human and really supportive. But I know people that haven't, and they've never ever forgot that. And often it has been the catalyst to them deciding that actually this isn't where I want to be anymore. I'm going to look for something else. And I just think, wow, that's, it seems like such a simple way to treat somebody that can make such a difference at such a difficult and vulnerable time.
Okay then, so I think in recent years there's been a lot of progress made in terms of workplace wellbeing. Mental health is discussed an awful lot more than it ever has been, particularly the impact for people at work. I think grief still lags behind. It's something that's still not talked about in the same way. Do you have thoughts on that, or what workplaces could be doing differently?
I think you've hit the nail on the head, Joe. I think that's very, very true. I'm a mental health first aider at work, and get involved in sort of wellbeing projects and other elements of mental health and wellbeing, whether it's anxiety or depression or stress. They feel like they have had the spotlight a bit more, rightly so, and to be applauded that workplaces are recognizing these things too. But I think grief has a long-lasting and obvious effect on one's mental health and well-being. And I think being able to bring it into the spotlight, give it some time in the spotlight as well, is really important, to allow these conversations like we're having today to occur, and hopefully an awareness grow amongst workplaces, colleagues, and organisations generally.
I think the thing for me is that lots of people in life may experience ill health or mental ill health, but death is the one thing that we will all experience. It's universal. There's not a single person in any workplace anywhere that will not lose somebody that they love at some point. And so to me, that makes it even more staggering that we don't talk about it more. One thing to bear in mind is the absolute unpredictability of how grief might affect an employee, and I do think that's worth workplaces considering. There's the obvious impact on somebody's mental health, or feeling more emotional or more tearful, but there are such physical symptoms that can linger for months as well. So people might lose their appetite, or they might not be able to sleep for what feels like months on end, and that can have that those physical kind of symptoms can have such a knock-on effect on how somebody might perform or how somebody might feel at work. And again, I just think it always comes back to being able to be honest or open with people. I could probably do better myself sometimes, but sort of practice what you preach. But actually, I think it's really important to sort of be able to tell people that, because it helps. I think if you're in the midst of it, it helps to know that you're not kind of crazy if you're waking up at 2:30 every single morning and your mind's whirring with all the things that you've got to do. It really helps if somebody goes, oh God, yeah, that happened to me too, or I think conversations are so important, such an important part of the healing process, and work is such a big part of people's life that it's absolutely right. We should have those conversations in the workplace as well.
I think you hit the nail on the head with that, Hayley. Conversations are so important, and work is such a big part of people's lives that it's really important that these conversations are opened up. Thanks both for your input today. Really valuable points that we've discussed. As we come to the end of the episode, I wanted to remind listeners about LionHeart. Reaching out for support can be challenging, but if you are an RICS professional, then LionHeart is here for you. Our support includes counselling for RICS professionals, their partner or spouse as well, and we also have youth counselling service available to support children aged 12 to 18 of RICS professionals. Calls to LionHeart are confidential, so you'll be talking to someone that understands surveyors and the profession that you're working in. I'd also like to point you in the direction of the LionHeart webinar library, where you can find a recorded webinar on understanding bereavement in the workplace if you wanted a little bit more information on this topic. So, thank you for listening to the LionHeart Talks podcast. I've been your host, Jo Grant. And thank you so much to our lovely guests, to Claire and to Hayley, for joining me.
Thanks, Jo. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us on LionHeart Talks, and we hope you've enjoyed the episode. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform to hear from us again, and don't forget you can find out more about how we're helping surveyors and their families on our website, lionheart.org.uk.